Awesome. So hello, everyone. Welcome to Slam School. I'm so excited today to talk through some writing practices and to think through where we are in the world. If you are joining us for the first time, SLAM is the Studies in Literacy and Multimedia Assembly, which is a part of the National Council of Teachers of English. You can look at our older videos in this series and find out more information about our organization at slam.education, not edu, so slam.education. Enough of that. I'm so excited to have Ann Whitney with us today to talk through some practices. Ann, do you want to introduce yourself for folks?
Sure. My name is Ann Whitney. I'm a faculty at Penn State, where I've been for the past, this is my 13th year there. I work with teachers of writing at all levels, so pre-K through high school and teachers of adults, special education, you name it. And one thing I've spent a lot of time with is writing groups of teachers. So that's, I think, what we're going to talk about.
Awesome. So as we talk about writing groups, I've got to confess, this is when we're talking today. This has been, it feels like a crazy week with rescinding of DACA, with a litany of other things happening, and so I just want to acknowledge there's a lot of feelings that are out
Yeah.
there, and so I'm wondering how does writing and writing groups fit into this? What do you got for us?
Yeah, I think it does. So sometimes when I have spoken or talked about writing groups with teachers, it can feel like a kind of private and introspective thing to do. Like, oh, I don't care what's happening out there in the world. I'm just here, like spending quality time with myself and
Yeah,
writing. I really don't see it that way at all. I see writing as one of those forms of radical self-care that we talk about. And so, like, I'm referencing the quote by Audre Lorde. She says,
hmm,
caring for myself it's not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. So a couple things about that. First of all, I think that to be a teacher right now and to do it with like willingness to engage the world as it is right now, with the oppression that's in it, with the practical challenges that are in teaching, with the kind of overwhelmingness of the work of teaching, I think that it's kind of an act of political warfare to be a teacher right now.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I see writing is self-care for a teacher, but it's also one of the tools, not to cling too tightly to the war metaphor, but it's also one of the tools of our battle,
yeah.
right? So that's how I think about it. I see
Perfect.
writing as this transformative thing, right? That you can change the world with writing. You can learn and change yourself with writing. And you can also kind of stop time in your classroom and think about it in a new way, and in a way that like strengthens you to go on and fight the fight.
Oh, I love that, the temporal possibilities there. I'm wondering, so as we think about writing as both a tool for healing, for self-care, and as a tool for for resistance and for political engagement, are you talking about this? I just want to kind of specify. Are you talking about
Yeah.
this in terms of guiding students through those practices, or is it self-care for teachers? Is it a both and?
I think writing does all of those things for students, but I'm really talking about us, the teachers, and
Perfect.
you, the teacher who's at home, looking at Slam School today. As long as I've been a teacher, I've also been writing in and from my classroom. And
Yeah.
I didn't do that because I was some genius. I did it because I had good friends who invited me to
Yeah.
write from the beginning at my classroom. And I was my first year teaching, I was invited to take part in a writing group, and it was 3 to 5 of us depending on who came. We
Hmm.
met in a teacher's classroom after school, or if we couldn't do that, we talked on the phone, and we would just write and share what we were doing. We didn't really know that we were doing anything important or special, but
Yeah.
it just seemed like every time we met, we agreed to meet again.
I love
and
it.
and right, and so that's how I started with writing groups. But yeah, I'm talking about groups of teachers who meet in person or online, who do it in real time, synchronously or asynchronously, like using some space to check in,
Yeah.
and sharing writing of any kind. So some of the writing groups that I've worked with are teachers writing about their classroom specifically, or writing for education specifically, but then others not. Sometimes it's people journaling, or it's people writing about their
Hmm.
lives, or writing a wedding toast, or writing stories. So really all of writing, but I hope it's teachers doing it.
Yeah, I love the idea of people writing lots of wedding toasts just in general. Like just as a good practice, probably.
I
Just,
really don't write them unless I've been invited to give a toast at a wedding. I'll say that much.
I think anytime you go to a wedding, you should just be prepared to give toasts all the time. Just be the obnoxious person.
That's great.
Um, so I want to get into some practices around like what sustains, how do you build
Yeah.
groups. But before we get there, I'm thinking about both my own experiences as a teacher, and I'm thinking about when I've encouraged pre-service teachers to be writers as teachers. the challenge of time oftentimes is what is something I hear, right? So how do you find the time to be a writer on top of, everything happening in the classroom as well as everything happening in the rest of the world? Do you have guidance or suggestions around that?
A few, but mostly I'll just say it's really hard. I mean,
Yeah.
there's just not enough time in teaching or really in life
Yeah.
to do anything that you want to do. Here is how teachers I know are handling that. First of all, that adage about write with your students. I am super serious about that.
Yeah.
So anytime I'm in a classroom, if it's second graders and we say, okay, find a spot and start writing, before I go to any child, I am really pretty religious about this. I open my notebook and I write for a couple of minutes. And so at least I wrote for a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
And I also find that my example quiets the children down, actually, than if I were walking around and saying, get started. It's quieter if I just
Sure.
go ahead and be quiet. But I also know teachers who will dedicate the 5 minutes after the bell. I mean, not a lot of time, but just at the end of the day, the kids are leaving, you're going to do some grading or attend a meeting or something. That 5 minutes, write a little something, go to the bathroom, go to the meeting.
Yeah.
Right? I know a lot of teachers put it in the morning. So as part of your coffee or your, getting your children ready for the day or whatever it is that happens in your house in the early morning, that's
Right.
a quiet time when nothing has happened yet. The other thing that I say to teachers with writing groups is that you don't have to write before the meeting. Some writing groups just meet to write. And so like locally, I do a group for teachers that we meet once a month and we meet for an hour and a half, and about an hour is writing.
Wow.
And then
That's
a
beautiful.
half an hour is talking about writing.
I love it. Those all feel manageable. I feel like those
Yeah.
are things we can do. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a group, what makes a writing group a good's probably a difficult qualitative word, right?
Yeah.
But what makes a writing group an effective writing group over time? How do you
Sure.
sustain it? Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing that people usually ask me about is who should I have in a group? And what I want to say is I don't know, because I don't know your people, but people you like and who chose to be there.
Yeah.
Right? So if you are a department head, please do not make your department be a writing group. If you are an administrator or a leader in some way, please do not require people to do a writing group. The people who come should be invited. And that's really important, because how do you feel when you're made to do things, right?
Yeah.
It just makes it harder automatically. So volunteers, I think the right size is between 4 and 6 people.
Okay.
Because if you get more than that, there's not time to talk. And if you have fewer than that, it's awkward. Like here we are having a private appointment, right? So 5 is enough that if somebody has to be absent or can't make it or just, falls away, it's okay. You can keep going. People ask, how often should we meet? I don't know. It's what you have time for. When I have started groups, what I try to do is say, okay, how much is too much? Like if I say weekly, that's going to make you not come. So what is our threshold as a group? Is it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month?
Yeah.
If you get further away than a month, you kind of forget. Right.
Got it.
And then how much time, right? Short. Short. What I always tell people is figure out how much time you're going to need just to be friends and catch up.
Yep.
And then set the timer for that amount of time, and then use whatever else you've allotted actually for the writing. You went to the trouble of meeting, and you don't want to while away all the time by talking. But the talking and sharing is really important, and it helps with the writing.
Yeah.
In the same way, you would never expect your class to just share in a really vulnerable way if they hadn't gotten to know one another, and if you ease into the day. And it's the same thing for a writing group.
Yeah, it does seem like part of that, the radical self-care part of writing, right, is the talk around, like that is, in some sense, that is part of the writing, is the talk about the writing, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's something that we talk about at the beginning of all of my groups is like open discussion about who are we as a group and why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Because, sometimes there's a person there who what they want to do is become an awesome writer and get their book published. And that person is looking for a specific kind of pointed feedback. Many of the rest of us are just looking for encouragement to write. We're looking for some collegiality to make teaching less lonely.
Yeah.
We're looking for ideas and feedback, but we're looking for a group more than we're looking for a specific text to get better.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. How are we going to be as writers? What's feedback going to look like? In my groups, what we tend to do is say the writer makes the rules about feedback. So I might write something and I needed to write it, but it's really raw for me. I might just say, just listen to this and say thank you.
Yeah.
And that's what that's what the group will do. And other times I'm saying, okay, poke holes in my argument because I'm expecting an argumentative reader,
Yeah.
and then they can do that. But that the author specify that and that there be some variety, I think is really important.
I love it. I feel like the fact that there's some real advantages I'm thinking about in terms of um, a lot of teachers might come to a writing group with very different expectations, right? I'm coming to this writing group for that social aspect, and I'll do the writing stuff just so I can be a part of a community, right? And some
Sure,
people want to get the novel published or want to do, some kind of other professional activity. So I'm wondering if,
definitely.
with all these different interests that kind of converge on a writing group, do you, when in the groups that you've participated in, do you center the kind of radical self-care approach and perspective in describing the group, or is that implicit? Like, I'm wondering how overt those kinds of beliefs are in the writing groups.
That's a good question. It has really varied
Yeah.
depending on why that group of people is forming a group. But one misconception that I'll try to clear up is that in order for the writing to be self-care or to be radical, it doesn't mean that it has to be writing about feelings
Hmm.
or that it has to be writing always directly about critical issues today, such as
Yeah.
racism or systems of oppression. I care about those things and I write about those things,
Yeah.
but I think the fact of coming together is already radical for
Hmm.
teachers. And I think that the fact of writing, as in taking time to have thoughts,
Yep.
taking one's thoughts as a teacher seriously enough to write them down,
Yep.
to voice them, right? And then taking a colleague so seriously as to share an important thought with him or her. Those are the things that I think are radical. And those are the things that I think provide the self-care. So it's not so much what we're writing or
Yep.
what we're writing about. Groups will really vary. Sometimes a group decides to be a personal writing group or decides
Yeah.
to write, we're all going to make presentations for NCTE as a group, right? Fine.
Yeah.
But to me, it's the fact of existing as a group that's voluntary and it's
Perfect.
about expression for teachers.
Yeah, I love. So I think two things I want to kind of, at least that I'm seeing from this, that it is probably helpful for folks to think about, is that one, it's a reorientation about what schools and what the practice within schools can be, right? So it shifts
Yeah,
some ownership and power there, right? And it's an opportunity for reclaiming and centering the kind of intellectual capacity of teachers, right? That's been particularly, I think, downtrodden in recent times. So when we talk about political participation, it's not just like the in the streets work that is also necessary, but it is the processes of reclaiming what we think labor means, right? In this post Labor Day week, as you put it.
absolutely. And it's both, right? I mean, you cannot do the work in the streets until you have understood the problem as
Yeah,
it exists in your work context. And
yeah,
so, one of the things that I've said about writing is that it stops time.
hmm,
So teaching is busy and it's overwhelming and it's fast, and we're expected to think fast and decide fast and produce things fast, and kids are made to go fast.
oh,
And it's an aspect of American culture right now. Um, when you are writing, it is really hard to be doing something other than writing.
yeah,
And so it has a mindful practice built in. It's very hard to write and not be there, at least for a second. And you can think in depth about a moment in a classroom in a different way than you
love it.
can by another format. Yeah.
So, so I'm convinced. I'm ready to start a writing group. But I'm a teacher in a school where I don't necessarily see other people that I think are also conducive to a writing group, or I might feel a little nervous to start that. Do you have suggestions on how I get started if this is a thing I want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I can say something about people, and then I can point you to some resources. So,
Yes.
as far as the people, what I want you to do is to think about those people in your building or people that you remember from the last university course that you took, or from a good professional development that you had,
Yeah.
or think back to somebody from your undergrad days somebody who you know from the teaching realm, but it doesn't have to be somebody you're super close to,
Hmm.
and invite that person. The power of an invitation is really it's underestimated. There's folks who want to write who don't know they want to write.
Yeah.
And so your example and your invitation is meaningful. The other thing I'll say is it can be K-12. It can be across buildings. It doesn't have to be like getting your team on board. In fact, sometimes there's a real advantage to working with people not at your school.
Yeah.
NCTE is a resource for that. Every year at the annual convention, my colleagues and I have a session specifically for teacher writers, in which
Hmm.
part of what we do is try to help matchmaking happen. So that's a way. The online space for NCTE and the connected community, any of those conversations is packed with teachers who want to who want to engage, right? And
Awesome.
who want to do things. In terms of tools online, groups that I've worked with have met in person, sure, but we've also used Zoom, which you and I are using to talk right
Yep.
now. We've used Google Hangouts and just a Google Doc,
Yep.
working together in that. I've seen writing groups use VoiceThread, and I'm trying this with a class I'm doing this fall, where a teacher has written something and he or she will share something using VoiceThread, just the free version of VoiceThread that's available. And VoiceThread makes video or documents or slides or whatever, but then people can come in and comment on it at specific moments
Right.
in that video. And so it's a cool way of commenting that feels a lot more live than it is. Any blogging platform, I've seen groups of teachers use just WordPress or something to post a bit of writing, and then they'll use the comments to reply, or even just to say, it's Saturday morning, I'm writing now, where are you? And everyone will kind of chime in and reply. I've seen people do that with Facebook Live, like they agree they're going to meet at a certain time. Someone agrees to go live, and then the friends will come on the comments and agree and say encouraging things. So really, platform is not terribly important. In terms of practices for a group, I can recommend 2 books. One of them is my own, and one of them is a really good book by a colleague. So I'm a co-author of a book, Coaching Teacher Writers. That came out last year from Teachers College Press. And Troy Hicks, Jim Frederickson, and Leah Zeidema and I co-wrote that, and it's packed with strategies. It is a whole book on teachers writing, and specifically writing groups. So if that sounds fun to you, take a look. The other really good book that I like right now about teacher writers and writing groups is The Teacher Writer by Christine Dawson. It is a fantastic up-close look at a group, but it's also got tons of advice. And she really hits the personal kind of self-care side of writing with colleagues as a teacher.
Great. I love it. Those are all, we will link to all this. So if you're watching this, look below, because hopefully those links should be in the video description here. But those are all super useful resources, and a bunch of NCT colleagues, right, listed as co-authors there. So really helpful. I'm excited to start writing. I think, and to one of the digital practices you shared, I think one of the more boring academic writing groups I've been a part of has been, being on Skype or on Google Hangout together and kind of muting both sides as we, write silently, and then we come back and do the check-in, right? Which feels very similar to being in a room with one another, except one person in the coffee shop and another person has a barking dog on their end or something.
That's really powerful. It's just being present with somebody.
Yeah. There's something about that space can converge even if time stops, right? I think there's some interesting Matthew McConaughey-ish connections here.
Absolutely.
So I think this is super helpful. I'm excited about reinvigorating my own writing group practices after this conversation. So thank you so much. If people have other questions or want to learn more about your work, is there a place we should point them to and bother them?
Sure, I'll point you to my website, and then you can also email me at awhitney@psu.
Awesome. We will put links again everywhere. And I really appreciate your time. It's been really helpful learning from you, and this has felt really helpful in particularly difficult times. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.